So yesterday we threw a couple of mugs in slightly different styles, and as promised, I've come back today when these pieces are leather hard, and I am ready to show you how to think about a handle, how to make the handle, and how to attach and modify the handle to optimize not only the visual aspect of it, but also how it feels in the hand. And I do have strong feelings about this. I really feel like a mug should have a handle that fits the form and fits your hand and makes it a joy to use, and not just some weird appendage that doesn't relate to the form. So to start out with, I just want to show you how I get ready to put the handle on. This guy is leather hard. It's got a nice indented side in the profile. It goes all the way around. So it's concave there. So I'm going to make the handle go from this fat point at the top to the fat point at the bottom and span that negative space. When I wire off, I end up with these little sharp edges, and that's fine. I'm going to show you how to get rid of those. There's a trick. So you want to take your finger like you're going to pinch something and put it around that corner and then just slide it. And what that does is it pulls that little flare or flange of clay off by shearing it off to the side. And I always do that all the way around wherever I see there's little goobers first, and then come back with the thenar eminence, that fatty, meaty part at the base of your thumb, and just round this thing out. But if you take the extra little flare off first, you don't end up with weird folded bits that stick up. You just get a nice finished round over. Hopefully you can see. Just slightly rounded over so that I don't have anything that's going to get chipped later on. And to me, that's really, really important. So this guy is ready to accept a handle. I'm going to pick up the other one and show you, just in case you didn't watch the preliminary video. This is the darted mug. So before I did anything, it looked like this, just kind of barrel shaped. Once I cut away that dart, I've got that negative space, that concave space there that I'll span the handle with. This one also has a little flare of clay, so I'm going to come along and pretend to pinch it, but slide along. And just shear that off. And then I'll use the heel of my hand, just round it. So this form, to me, it's very smooth. I've ribbed out most of the throwing marks, and so this one's going to want some excitement from the glazing. The other one can just have straight up glazing, and the excitement of all the ridges will kind of make its own decoration. So that'll be something to think about later on. Okay, so designing the handle. I have room in this pocket for 3 fingers. To me, 3 fingers is a really good choice for a handle because I still have 1 finger below the handle to kind of give some support, and my thumb can go on top, and it just feels like a full hand kind of grip without being something where my whole hand's in there and it can just move around. By having 1 finger up underneath there, it's just a little bit more comfortable and stable the way I hold the handle. Now, you know, my wife being what she calls a mug snuggler, she would also get 3 fingers in there, and the handle might go between those last 2, and that would be a perfectly fine way to use a mug like this. So 3 fingers worth. The whole point of the dart and all that extra effort to alter is to get that handle in as tight as possible, but still have room to get your fingers in without burning your knuckles. So I'm kind of putting my fingers up to it and thinking about how far it needs to spring away. And it's not super far. So then I think, okay, well, how long do I need to cut my handle? And I am actually going to measure the space. So I've got just about 3 inches from point to point. And that's a good amount for my 3 fingers, plus room for shrinkage and room for not getting my fingers burnt. So 3 inches, but it needs to go out a little bit and back in a little bit at the top and bottom. So I think that if I make this handle between 4 and 4.5 inches long from the points where I cut it, I'm going to have a really nice amount of space and not too much. Kind of analyze this one in the same way. Also potential for a nice 3-finger handle. So Get my ruler out. I don't usually actually use a ruler, I just kind of eyeball it, but I want to talk about it. So it's 3 inches from the point to point of where I'm going to be attaching. And this one is going to need to come out about 1 inch and go in about 1 inch. So I'm going to think this one's going to be more like a 5-inch handle to give me the curve that I want. It could be a little bit less because I'm not going straight out, straight down, and straight back in. That curve is going to be a little bit less long than that. So somewhere between 4.5 and 5 inches is what I'm thinking for this guy. So those are ready to accept their handles, except they're not scored. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pull the handles first so they can be drying a little bit, and then we're going to score the attachment points, show you how to cut the handles to length, and go from there. I'm going to set these aside. It's nice to have a shelf right next to where you're working, and show you. I've got some prepped clay here. This has come through my pug mill. Straight off the bag is fine. Recently wedged up and thoroughly wedged up is fine for making a handle. You don't want whatever little scraps are sitting on the side of your wheel from things that you cut off. You need proper clay, and you want to get it in one bite off of the block. So I don't usually use a wire to make a handle blank. I usually use my hand, and I keep my fingers together, and I kind of take a bite with my fingers, kind of like I'm some sort of a backhoe or something. I'm going to grab a hold of the clay so that I'm here, and I just grab a hold of that much clay. If it's too much, fine, I don't have to use it all. If it's not enough, I don't want to stick another piece to it and have already kind of a weak spot in the handle. So I'm going to take another bite from my other handle, set that aside. I'm going to try to work up where you can see I'm turning it and squeezing it in my hand to start with. Then I'm going to bop on the ends a little bit to get it into a basic cylinder. I'll keep stopping and showing you where I am. Bop the ends. I want there to be plenty of pulling to do because I want a nice, elegant, pulled looking handle. And I won't be using the whole length. I was about to say something about how much length I already have, and it's probably 3.5, pushing 4 inches, but I'm not going to use the entire chunk of clay. There's going to be quite a bit of extra cut off at both ends. A word about that. I really do prefer a handle that attaches sort of end on at the top and the bottom, rather than a lot of handles are end on at the top and then kind of side on at the bottom. They kind of have like a question mark shape. I prefer C-shape or D-shaped handles because there's no wasted space. At the question marks handle, you've got kind of a V where your fingers don't fit anyway, and I don't love that style visually or functionally. That's just, I guess 19 years of doing handles. I always didn't make them the same way as I do now, but it's something I've been trying to refine through my whole pottery career, and it's where I am now. I like them sort of C-shaped. All right, so this guy is just about ready to think about pulling. Sometimes I will roll it a little thinner in the middle, so I've got a little more taper. A lot of times I'll do that on the table, but I'm trying to show you. So there's I call this a bone handle. I'll do the same thing to the other one. The nicer the precursor to the handle is, the nicer your handle is going to be. So I take my time and really kind of pinch and prod and get it looking the way I want it. Always thickening up those ends. So there's that. I've got a board here on top of my wheel, so I'm going to go ahead and smack this down. I want a handle that is more oval or diamond shape in cross-section and less round. So you might as well start with a half round shape by taking this and holding it in your hand like so, and just pop it down on the board or on the table, and you end up with half round. So same thing with the other one. All right, another half round. Now I'm going to pick up my hand washing bucket because it doesn't have any chunks of clay in it, and it's right here just off screen. So anytime I stick my hand down in there, it's going in the water, and I'm going to hold this up nice and close to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to talk to you about how I'm holding my hand and what I'm thinking about as I'm pulling this handle. My right hand is doing the pulling, so my left hand is in charge of holding on to this plug of clay. I put my palm down, I curl my fingers back towards my wrist so that my hand looks like that. I lay the handle here and wrap my thumb around. And this gives me full access to everything except for the top ½ inch of clay. And then I'm going to hold it up high, wet my hand, wet the handle, make sure everything is slick. It's just like on the wheel, you want to use plenty of water. And then I'm going to pull this with my hand in a cross section that's more oval. And I'm going to pull it from opposite sides. So I'm going to do it from here where my hands are parallel, or my arms are parallel to one another but facing inward. And then I'm going to put them this way where they're parallel to each other and facing away from my body. I'm never going to that halfway point where I'm 90 degrees to where I started, because I don't want to thicken these thinner edges. I want to keep the thickness in this plane and not in this plane. Hope that makes sense. So I'm going to pull down, and I'm stopping when I get to the bottom and releasing so that I leave that thickness at the bottom. Now here I'm coming 180 degrees from that. So I'm here, 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 here. It's okay to do more than one pull between wetting your hand. You just want to make sure that you are paying attention. And if it's starting to feel like there's drag, you want to get more water on there. It's just like the wheel. It's just a linear version of shaping clay instead of a spinning version. All right. So this is getting, it's wide, which I like. I have had complaints from people with small hands, and that's fine. I can make them narrower, but for me, I like this to be pretty wide because it feels kind of comfortable and secure in my hand. But if your fingers are short and the knuckles are closer together, sometimes a wide handle like that can kind of, you can't really close your hand around it, and it doesn't feel as comfortable. So depends on who you're making the mug for. If it's for somebody with big hands or long fingers like me, or if it's somebody that has smaller hands, you might change the way you make that initial plug of clay. This is at least 6 inches long, so I've got room to cut at the top and bottom to get it down to the final size. So I always pull it and then I lay it just completely flat on the wheel. I don't really believe in drawing it in a curve. I just lay it down. So I'm going to do the same thing to this guy. I would recommend, if you're somewhat feeling new or uncertain about your handle pulling, don't make 2 handles when you're making 2 mugs. Make at least twice as many handles as you need. You'll get that much more practice, because if you think about it, not every piece that you make on the wheel gets a handle on it. So your handle skills will lag behind your throwing skills unless you actively kind of work to build your handle pulling skills. So I like to be able to just pull it and have it look really almost muscular and smooth, no thin and thick spots, just thicker at the ends and tapered in the middle. To me, that's the ideal. So again, I'm going to lay that down. In an ideal world, I would let that sit for maybe 20 minutes to get the shine off. I want to get that loose surface water off. It's the thing that I would use the rib for. If I was throwing a pot on the wheel, I would just scrape all that off. But I don't have any rib that I can use to scrape the slurry off my handles. Just use time. I let it sit there happily waiting on a board until its time to shine comes. So while I'm waiting for that to happen, I can go ahead and prepare the surface of the mug itself for accepting that handle. So here goes. I'm going to set this bucket out of my way, and we're going to talk about scoring. I feel like it is really important to score the surface of your mug or whatever you're putting a handle on, because clay is made up of all these flat particles. And when we work the clay on the wheel and we use the rib, we use our fingers, we align those surface particles. So you've got a whole sheet of clay particles that are all facing the same way. And while the clay is wet, you can stick another piece of clay to it. But once the water evaporates, there's no mechanical connection between them. They're just sitting like this, and they're sticking based on the water between them. Of course, it's going to dry at some point, and then that handle, the first time you bump it, is going to just fall away. You don't want that. So we're going to roughen up the surface so that instead of sitting like this together, they're going to sit like that. They're going to mesh together, and there's going to be a mechanical bond between the two layers of clay, and we're going to have much less trouble. I still don't recommend picking up your greenware by the handle and shaking it around and testing it. You know, let it get through the kiln, let it get through bisque before you hold it by the handle. But scoring will definitely make things more secure. Okay, so here is the mug that doesn't have a dart. It's just got this nice negative space in the curve there. Definitely going to try to span that shape and create a pleasing shape inside for just looking at the profile, and a pleasing shape for my hand to fit in there and grab the handle. I have a multi-scratcher tool. It's just a bunch of little needles stuck in some polymer clay. And I'm going to dip that dip that tool into a little bit of goopy, soft clay. And I'm just going to decide where I want this handle to go. Because I've got those diagonal spirals on this pot, I've got slightly different profiles all the way around. And I can decide whether I want to have the handle attaching a little bit lower. And I think I am going to go for kind of this area down here where I can attach it and it'll fit on this ridge right here. I'm going to scratch it up and show you what I'm doing. When you're scoring a pot, you want to make sure you're scoring more than what you need in terms of area. You don't want the edges of your handle sticking to unscored clay. So that looks like it's going to be just about big enough. If I stick it on there and it's not big enough, I'll come away and score it again. I know that looks like a lot of scoring, but that's what you want. It's really easy to come back after you've attached it and just run your finger over extra scored areas. So that's the bottom attachment point. And I'm going to get the top up here. It's really important to make sure that they line up vertically. You don't want your handle going on crooked, or maybe you do, but I don't want mine going on crooked. I like them to be straight up above one another. You don't want to dig through the wall, but you want to make sure that you're really digging in with those needles and making the whole surface jumbled up so that it can make a good bond with the handle. Okay, I think that I'm going to reposition the camera so that you can see how I cut the ends of the handle. I'll do a quick score on this other one before I do that. I also want to point out to you that this comes to a sharper point where it's darted than just a round cylinder. So I'll be cutting the end of the handle for this guy in a much more dramatic arc than I will for the other one. So let's go ahead and rough this guy up. I'm definitely going from just point to point. One good thing about my garage studio is because there's no air movement in here, there's no climate control. I just left these since last night uncovered, and they're just now reaching a nice leather hard consistency. It's great unless you're in a hurry. Then you got to figure out some fans or putting things outside. But the year I taught out in Arizona, I was always amazed. I could throw a board of pots and then come back in my free period an hour later, and they were ready for handles, and then come back at the end of the class day and they were ready to go in the bisque kiln. It was, you could get some stuff made, but you had to use a clay that could put up with speedy drying. All right, so that's all scored up. You'll notice I left that seam visible. I'm calling it a feature. I figure if I'm going to go to the trouble to make a dart, I want somebody to notice that it's there and understand what I did. You could make a different choice. You could smooth it out if you like it more blended. All right, I'm going to move that camera and show you how I'm going to attach these handles. All right, I'm laid out here, kind of like I would be laid out if I was working at the table. And this is my little temporary table set on top of my wheel. And I didn't really wait any time at all to let these things dry up, but I'm gonna just show you how to attach them anyway. So we had talked about maybe 4.5, 5 inches of length, and this thing is plenty long. Like the overall length is 7 inches. So I'm gonna be cutting quite a bit off of the ends. I think if I come in just to the point where they start to flare out, that's gonna look great. So I'm gonna be really generous with how much I cut off. Now, you can use a needle tool like this to cut your ends, or if you're fancy, you can use a cheese wire and cut. Either way, the idea isn't that you're just gonna be slicing off a nice straight end on the piece of clay. You wanna think about the shape of the mug that you're attaching it to and try to match that shape with the way you make the cut. So I'm gonna show you how I do it with the cheese wire on one of them, and I'll do it with a needle on the other, so you have both options. So I'm kind of remembering where I was gonna cut based on what I did with that ruler. You could always make a little mark after you measure with the ruler. But I'm gonna come here, cut towards the camera now, away from my body, and then I'm gonna come back towards myself at the other end. So I'm making this rounded shape, which should roughly match, and it does, the shape of the mug. It's the reverse shape of the mug shape. I'm gonna double check with my little handy tape measure here. Yeah, I got plenty of handle. So I'm gonna come and turn this around. I always like to cut on the side towards myself and cut plenty off on this end too. All right, so that's the handle length that I've got. And, I'll hope that I haven't cut it too short. You can always pull it a little bit more. Once you get the top on there, if you realize that you've cut it short and you don't have enough length, assuming you've attached it well enough at the top, you're gonna be able to just pull it a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna very carefully pick this up with flat pads of my fingers, and I'm gonna hammer on this end with the tip of my finger to make a little bit more surface area for that join. So that's what that looks like. It's got a little bit of kind of a mouth, and it looks a little bit flared out from the side. I'll do the same thing from the other side. One end is a little heavier than the other, and lately I've been enjoying putting the heavy end at the bottom. Kind of goes with the heavier part of the shape of the mug, and so I'm liking that. Of course, totally up to you. So I'm going to score this up really thoroughly, being very careful not to sort of pinch my fingers down into that handle. I'm just sort of holding it with real flat fingers and manipulating it as little as possible. Scratching up, scratching up. All right, we're roughened up. I'm gonna bring the mug right to the edge of my board, and I'm gonna face the scored part right towards me. And I kind of lean back and size it up. I'm supporting this handle totally flat, so it's not flopping around. And I'm gonna put my hand inside the mug and line that new surface, new handle surface up with the scored surface on the pot. And then I'm gonna give it a little jiggle and a push. The jiggle push, I call it. And that jiggle helps kind of mesh the scored up areas together so they kind of grab. And it works because it's already, all I did was give it that little jiggle push, and it's hanging and it's happy. I can shake it around, it's not going anywhere. And then I'm gonna support it, set it back down, and as long as I don't let go, I can control the curve. And I'm gonna bring the bottom end of the handle in contact with where I've scored, and I'm gonna jiggle push it. Now it doesn't look like a finished handle to me yet. It's on there, but it's just whatever curve happened because I've connected it at 2 points. So it doesn't look super amazing at this point. It's just, it's on there, and that's fine. That's where we want to be. So I will kind of just double check that everything is making good contact. Don't want to mess with it too much. I just want to make sure it's on there. because this is still pretty soft. And it is definitely, it's on the handle. The handle's on the mug. It's not going anywhere. It doesn't look super refined, and there's still some work to do, but that's good to set aside for a minute and focus on the other one. And then I'll show you how to make the refinement that actually makes it look good. Now, if you get to this point and you've got a lot of little dried clay on your hands, take the 2 seconds to clean your hands, because your hands being covered with dried clay means that you're going to be making more marks on the pot and leaving behind little crusty goobers that don't add to the beauty of your piece. So I'm going to bring this other handle over where I can work on it. I'm going to get a quick idea of its length. And this one's real long. The overall length is 8 inches. I definitely won't be needing that much. So I'm just going to take a section out of the middle that gives me the taper that I'm after. It said maybe 4.5 inches. So, yeah. You know, sometimes you might get to this point and go, I really don't need that much handle, and I don't like what I have, and you would just pull another one. I could have taken a smaller piece of clay and maybe made a smaller handle, but I'm gonna make this work. This time I'm gonna use the needle tool, and I'm gonna make an even more extreme swoop when I cut. I've got the needle straight up and down, but I'm gonna cut a nice arc to duplicate those points of the kind of egg-shaped profile in this mug. So I'm coming all the way into here, cutting in, and coming back out. So that shape is meant to duplicate the end of my, my dart. Same thing over here, quite strongly inward. And I'll double check my length here. Awesome. Cut that shorter than I thought. It's only about 4 inches, so that'll maybe give me a chance to show you how to correct it if it ends up feeling like it's too short. All right. There's a bright side to everything. Hammering on that a little bit, so it's got a little more area for attaching. I like the fineness of the wire for cutting off. It's nice, but it's sort of an extra tool to get, and so the needle tool works fine. There's something a little bit nice about having that wire on the frame, because you can just kind of swoop through, get a nice curve. All right, I'm gonna go with my usual thing here of the lighter end at the top and the heavier end of the handle at the bottom. So I'm gonna bring this over. I've scored. I'm gonna jiggle push this top part on. I'm kind of feeling for the point underneath the handle, because I want it to line up right with the point. That way that negative space is just gonna spring right from where the dart ends. So it looks like that. And then I'm gonna come down here and see. That is just about long enough. It's a little tiny bit short. So I'm gonna let this hang free for a second, and I'm gonna wet my hand and pull this just a little bit longer. It's a good way to find out if you've got your handle attachment right. Let me set this other mug out of the way and bring my bucket back. All right, this is gonna be a little low where the camera is sitting, so I'll come next to it so you can see. Just pull this a little bit longer out of the screen. Sorry, I've got to get it up where I can see what I'm doing, so apologies for the camera work. I'll do one more down low where you can see it. Just gently pulling, and then I'm gonna set this out of the way again. Support it. Set the cup down, and now I should be able to attach it exactly the way I want at the bottom. Yeah, that's great. So I'm gonna jiggle, push it on there. And I'm gonna stop for a second, clean my hands off, and show you that profile. So it's not perfect yet, but it's plenty long enough, and I can get this handle to attach at the bottom. A lot of the things that I like to do when I'm attaching handles involve real flat fingers. I don't like to get in there with my fingertips, because that's when you start getting kind of messy, mussy looking surfaces. When you use the pads of your fingers, it works a little bit better. So kind of coming along, and I like to sometimes, if I want to blend it in a little bit, I'll take my finger and sort of twist. That'll help draw some clay down into that seam. All right, so obviously that top part is a little tight for the finger to get in there, and it looks a little bit kind of droopy, and that's fine because we're going to fix it up right now. I'm going to take and smooth out a little bit above my handle attachment where I've got extra scoring. Real easy. You just rub your finger over it, and it's happily smoothed out. If it's kind of craggly down in there, you can use a little tool. I recommend, though, waiting until the handle itself has reached a leather hard stage before you go in there and try to get near the handle, because you want it to be sturdy enough. And I'm just going to take a damp finger, and I want to open up the space next to the pot here and create a little bit more room for my finger. I'm just kind of bumping up against the top of that handle curve. That, I think, is going to be nice and comfortable. If this hadn't had a dart, I think that that would have been too tight to the form. So if you compare what it would have looked like on the other side, you wouldn't have had room for your hand. But by cutting away that section, I've got this handle that doesn't stick way out and make it hard to control the shape, but I can still get my hand totally comfortably inside that loop. Let's just finish off this lesson with the same kind of concept on this guy. That shape is just horrible. It's like, it doesn't look like anything. Let's make it fit this mug a little bit better. So I'm gonna kind of run that wet finger in there, and what I'm thinking about is I want the outside edge of the handle to run kind of parallel the overall average shape of the mug. So this average shape of this mug is slightly inwardly tipped, and I want the same thing to be true for the outer face of this handle. So I'm just going to dampen that finger and perk up here, kind of perk it down there, and just sort of work this until I've got kind of a parallel line. So that's already a lot better. Might work it a little bit more when it gets stiffer, just to make sure. I feel like it flies away a little bit too much, and so you can solve that by just perking it up a little higher. That sort of gets rid of a little bit of the outward flow, and it also creates a nice little pocket for your index finger to fit in. I think that actually looks better. I'm going to perk it out again here so that it has that parallel to the sides feel, and that's much better, that overall shape and profile. Obviously, this is all personal choice and personal taste. You might like a completely different handle, but I've spent a lot of years thinking about what feels good in my hand. I can't put myself in somebody else's hand size, but this feels really good to my hand. And you know, you can get feedback from other people, and the nicest way you can learn, in fact, an assignment that I gave my kids from Athens Academy after they had their first firing was, you know, you go home, you use your piece and kind of report back on how it felt, and then let somebody else use your piece and get their feedback on what it felt like and what their experience was like. And that's how you can start to refine your own preferences when it comes to making handles, making the lip of your mug, all these little things that are the points of contact between the piece of art that you've made and the end user. You want to see how that interface is. And sometimes the best way to do it is try it out yourself and get guinea pigs from your friends and family to give it a shot. And if you're giving them away, you don't usually get any complaints. Thanks so much for your attention, guys. I hope that you'll experiment and really be thoughtful about the way you make and attach your handles. It's a journey. Don't get discouraged. I really do feel like making a good handle is just about the hardest thing in ceramics to do. And so, give yourself a break while you're aspiring to a high standard. Realize that there's a practice element too, and enjoy the journey.